So let's talk about fire doors.
A lot of people, when we do inspections, they don't understand it. They think their fire door is to protect them.
About 60% of doors in the UK don't comply.
To escape the fire, you have to walk past or be near somebody else's flat.
There's very few landlords, from what I can see, doing the same thing.
It took them, the government or legal bodies, 2 or 3 years to get people into court and then prosecute.
And the door probably did pass regulations in 1990.
Interesting.
And then the flat owner will say, look, I've not changed this door. This door's in the perfect condition. I've not made any adjustments.
Of 11 flats, 10 have failed.
Not getting your payout is one thing. The worst it looks is you're culpable and you get imprisoned or you get fined.
The maximum is 2.5 years imprisonment. That's
really?
what's in the reform order.
But it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, if we can help another person become compliant, that's a good thing.
Welcome everybody to what is the first, the pilot series of our new podcast series. We've got Dean Salmon here from CFD. We've got Gerry Purcell from Perco, soon to be amalgamated as Expyro Fire Safety Group. And we're joined, you're the first actually, Nicholas James from Nicholas James. You're the first on our podcast series. So welcome to you all today.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Really wanted to start talking about fire safety and specifically fire doors. It's a big subject at the moment, and I think it's fair to say that there's quite a lot of confusion about who's responsible and what this all actually means. So I thought we'd start with talking about fire doors and why they're so important. So let's start with you, Gerry, actually. So tell us about what you do today, and we can sort of elaborate more on the subject.
Yeah, we're a company that carries out fire door inspections, residential and commercial. So new government guidance came in a couple of years ago where certain flat doors have to be checked on a regular basis, and we ensure that when we do our inspection, we ensure that they are either 30-minute or 60-minute fire resistant, depending on what the requirement is. Right. Okay.
So, and how often do you do this, and who asks you to do the job?
It's not. Yeah. It can be lots of different people. Could be a property management company. Could be an individual landlord. Could be a commercial company. Could be a housing association. Could be a business. Could be a hospital. Could be. So how often they get checked depends on what the door is for.
Right.
So if it's a flat entrance door, it's normally once a year. If it's a communal lobby door, it might be every 3 months. If it's a door in a commercial premises, depending on what that premises is for, what it's used for, if it's a hospital, if it's a library, or depending on what the recommendation was, like how often that door needs to be checked.
Okay.
It'll, as a minimum once a year.
Right, yeah. Okay. So this is interesting. So you mentioned landlords.
Yeah.
Dean, obviously, before setting up compliant fire doors and soon to be Expyro Fire Safety Group, you were a landlord.
Yeah.
So this is actually something that was...
I've been a landlord since 2000.
Yes.
And I'm probably a professional landlord since 2014. We manage over 25 properties, freeholds, leaseholds and things like that. And we kind of got to know about the fire door regulations when we got a letter through from our management company that one of our doors needed to be inspected. This was back in 2023, July 2023. I wasn't aware of the seriousness of fire doors at the time. And obviously, once we started to look into it, we realised we wanted to become compliant. I struggled to find anybody that could do the work and to certify it afterwards. So there was an opportunity for me to set up a company. Did it with a couple of friends of mine that owned a loft conversion company, but they were specialists in doing fire doors. And that's when I got to know Gerry. So Gerry had inspected the door, obviously hadn't passed it. We then thought there's an opportunity here to do this really well and do a real professional job, because it wasn't particularly professional back in 2023. And that's how the company was formed. So that's where we are now.
Interesting. Okay. So if you could round the circle on this. So which one of you knew Nicholas, and how's Nicholas become part of this discussion?
I got to know Nicholas through a lady that works for me called Annette. Annette has worked with Nicholas in the past with Scott and Stapleton, and we kind of got to know each other just through Annette. And we realised that as a fire door remedial company, we wanted to do some link ups with some of the fire risk assessors in the area.
Right.
Nicholas had a very good reputation in the area, so we thought it would be a good idea to meet up. I think we met up about 3 or 4 months ago.
Yes.
And we kind of really hit it off. I think he appreciates the work we do. It's a very professional work. We appreciate Nicholas's qualifications and the work he does, and it's really worked out well.
Yeah. So, Nicholas, you may as well, this is a perfect segue to tell us a little bit about the business, and then I can ask you some questions collectively about how critical fire doors are and really what the role is. So,
yeah, I entered the fire industry trade in 1984, so
right.
I've been working in it for 41 years, yes. But obviously noticed a lot of changes, but this is quite paramount at the moment, the fire doors and fire risk assessments, because of the change in legislation. But we work with compliant fire doors, using them as a contractor to carry out all the works for us, but we do all the risk assessments and also fire door inspections. But also, along with that, we carry out supply a lot of other services like passive fire alarm systems,
right.
Emergency lights. So it's an overall coverage of all aspects of fire protection. But the biggest part is obviously the fire door inspections and risk assessments at the moment, and maintaining that obviously throughout all premises that it's kept to the required standards to the fire reform.
So you're the perfect company and person to be on our first podcast. So this is brilliant. Right person in the seat. So let's talk about fire doors and the role that they play and how critical they are.
Well, from a landlord perspective, they're extremely important. If you're in a block of flats and only one person has done the door, you're kind of putting everyone else at risk. The law's there for a reason, and as a landlord, and I'm putting my landlord hat on here, I get very frustrated when other flats in a block aren't compliant, because that means that my tenant is making everyone else safe, and if there was a fire, we're protecting other tenants, and the other tenants or the other landlords aren't protecting my tenants. So I get a little bit I get quite passionate about that. So that's why I think the fire doors are very important. It's going to save someone's life.
Yeah, it's all about protecting the fire escape routes,
right,
in the shared areas, which is what a lot of people, when we do inspections, they don't understand it. They think their fire door is to protect them inside their flat.
So that's so interesting. Yeah, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
That's the way I saw it.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
it's not at all. It's to protect the shared area, the hallway, to make sure that is free from fire and smoke for at least 30 minutes, so they can escape, so everybody in the building can escape the building. And going back to Dean's comment, that's why it's really important that everybody's on board, every flat owner is on board, and all of the doors are fire resistant in that building.
So that's not easy though, is it? So if you've got a block,
it's not easy. No.
You're making the resident, the landlord ultimately, but it's the residents that who pays? Is it the resident who's paying for the fire door?
Depends on the lease. But normally for the flat door, it is the flat owner that pays for that door. Normally, not always, depends on the lease.
Right.
You might know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, 99% of the time, the doors are demised to the leaseholder. Now, that would be a landlord or an owner-occupier. But it comes down to, I just think, for me, there's not enough education, as Gerry just pointed out, that you are not, as much as you're saving your own life, if you're a leaseholder or your tenants, you're saving everybody else in that block. If there's a fire in your kitchen, you're giving everyone else 30 minutes to get out of that block. So it's extremely important. But this is the grey area. Who is responsible? Clearly, the communal doors are responsible of the freehold, and that goes through a service charge account. That's fine. That normally gets done pretty quickly. The doors, though, is a grey area, because you can tell a leaseholder they need to get the doors done. Not a lot of them get them done. I mean, I'm in a block that was FRA was carried out 2 years ago.
FRA, fire risk assessment.
Yes. Sorry, was carried out 2 years ago. Of 11 flats, basically 10 have failed. And
Right.
they failed 2 years ago, and they're still failing now.
Yes.
I'm the only one in that block that's got a compliant fire door.
Interesting.
And it's frustrating because, I've spoken to the other leaseholders, and it's a little bit of, well, until we need to do it or have to do it or legally, I say you have to do it legally, but it's still falling on deaf ears.
So you're seeing this, presumably, Nicholas, all the time, are you?
Yeah, it's quite common,
Yeah.
especially in managed blocks and where there's shared accommodation. I mean, the doors are there for the preservation of life and premises. So,
Yeah.
there's two aspects to it as well. So we're protecting the premises, but also protecting the occupants. So, yeah, it's a issue that comes up all the time. We're trying to enforce it onto obviously leaseholders or landlords, basically. So it's quite common, but it's where and how do you approach that to get the the residents to actually comply.
I think it's getting better. I've noticed it. People are getting more aware of it. There's more noise about it.
Presumably,
Yeah.
dare I say it, but Grenfell
Yeah,
and
that's-
things
yeah.
like this really bring the subject of fire safety
Yeah.
to the
Fires
forefront.
happen in blocks of flats more often than people may realise.
Right.
They do. Since Grenfell, there's been a couple more high-profile fires in blocks of flats in London.
Yeah.
So it does happen.
So fire doors and their role and compartmentalisation. This is
Yeah.
what you were saying earlier, is it? This
Yeah.
is the ability to.
Yeah. So you, wherever there's a shared area and there's at least two flats, so to escape the fire, you have to walk past or be near somebody else's flat. So if there's
Gotcha.
a fire in that flat, that has to protect the shared area that the person has to walk through to escape the building if there's a fire. So that's compartmentalisation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So talk to us then about this word responsibility. I find it really fascinating. So I guess if I'm looking at this podcast and I'm hearing this podcast, I'm asking myself, well, where is the responsibility? What role do I play in the responsibility league, as it were? So is it the landlords? Is it block managers?
It depends sometimes. When we talk of responsibility, it's all to do with also if there's an FRA or risk assessment carried out on the building. Normally within that risk assessment, it will define who the responsible person is.
Right.
Then that obviously opens up other areas where that responsible person would manage those blocks or issues that are found on the risk assessment. But
why would a property have a risk assessment? Who
the
does
risk
that?
assessment is normally, it comes about, it's something that should be carried out either yearly or over a 2-year period. But normally it would be something when maybe someone's selling a property within that block,
Right.
or any other issues with maybe fire services, anything like that. They can demand a risk assessment on the premises as well. But normally what's coming apparent lately is when people, tenants or landlords are selling their flats, that risk assessments are being required on the premises.
Yeah, we're seeing a bit more of that at Compliant Fire Doors. We're getting solicitors now giving us a call on the conveyancing side when somebody's looking to sell their flat. It's being picked up on the LP1s that the doors aren't certified, and it's holding up a lot of the sales. So it's another thing that's being highlighted, that if you want to sell your flat quickly, then you probably do need a certificate.
Yeah, so again, it's this who's enforcing it and thereby pushing this.
A good property manager would have a schedule where they do timely fire risk assessments and fire
Right.
door inspections. So that
Do they have to be by law, or is it just a good property? It's good due diligence. What's the
Good due diligence.
Yeah,
I think,
it's
really. I mean, some property managing agencies actually do it every 2 years, as I said,
Right.
just as a practice to
Right.
confirm that the building, or mainly the common area, is to a compliant standard.
Right.
Because there are changes, government legislation changes over the years, so they need to comply to the new legislation change.
is that a legal standing? Or
It would be, yeah, because if they've implemented a new legislation change, then obviously the blocks would be required to adhere to that regulation
Right.
or legislation that's been put in place. And that's like with this current implementation of the laws for fire doors.
Right.
So there's been 3 changes over 7 years with fire doors.
Oh, okay.
So the January 24 it was, wasn't it, when the new legislation come in. So it made it more apparent that it had to be implemented in a more serious way to get people.
And I imagine, you mentioned there about the education piece, I imagine that a lot of people don't even know this. They're not aware of this.
No, that's it, yeah. And I mean, in all areas as well, solicitors and block management companies, some of them are still catching up with all the legislation.
I think it's the educational part of it.
Yeah.
And this is again with my landlord hat on, I only became aware of it when Gerry came round. But once I was aware of it, I made it a point to make sure that all my doors become compliant. There's very few landlords, from what I can see, doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think the education needs to be. I was watching a video, in fact, from Brand Elect on how fire doors, are tested, and it was staggering that a door that's not a fire door, how quickly it burns through. And I think people don't realise, if a fire does, start in one of the flats, it will go through a non-compliant door very, very quickly.
Yeah, because it's interesting. There is a misconception, I imagine. Aren't all doors fire doors? Evidently not.
Clearly not.
Yeah, but you see, I wonder.
I think Gerry and Nicholas on their travels must see so many different sorts of doors.
and a lot of people because they just don't know, they get caught out. They bought a flat in a block, and the door they look at and think, I don't really like this door. It's old. It's the original door. I'll put in a nice UPVC door.
Yeah. Right.
And that is great for security. That's what they're built for.
Yeah.
But it will just melt in a fire. Won't last 30 minutes.
That's quite common, isn't
it?
it
Is, yeah.
People,
that's
they
so
change
interesting.
It without obviously having the knowledge that it has to be compliant. But I think most, if you go around on talking about fire doors again, the most new builds as well, and I think about 60% of doors in the UK don't comply.
What, on new builds?
No, in total, all premises, but even new builds. 2 years ago, I went to a premises, done an inspection, and the doors didn't comply. It's only 2 years old. So I think that's why it's become, the legislation has become a lot more.
And what was the main reason they didn't comply? Was it
obviously uneducated, or
but they would have been fire doors, but the gaps.
The gaps were too big. So it's
it,
people not having experience.
Yeah.
That's why certification for doors now has been brought in. So each door will be certificated, and it will show that the door is compliant that's been installed.
What I've seen on new builds, I don't know if you've seen this, so they're building a new block of flats, and they have different tradesmen in doing different bits, and they'll put in the fire doors, and everything is perfect and everything is okay, but they haven't put all the flooring in. So the carpenters will take a bit off the bottom of the door to make sure all the flooring can go in, but they're not sure how thick the flooring is going to be. So when the flooring goes in, the gap at the bottom is always too big. So they have to go back on the back of our report and build up that door again. That happens a lot.
I was going to say, because once all of the fitting's been done, you go back and reassess it, do you?
Mm. But if
what if you didn't reassess it, or you have to because you have to give a certificate?
You get a certificate, yeah. So there isn't even for like qualified tradesmen. These are qualified carpenters. They know what they're doing, and the developers qualified. But there's still a lack of education on fire doors there, and it'll just take a little bit of education for them to know. Okay, we need to make sure when this door goes in and then the flooring goes in, there's still only a sufficient gap at the bottom of the door.
There's a high percentage of carpenters or installers of fire doors. They just haven't got the knowledge. There are courses around, installers courses, and I think that's something that's probably got to be pushed forward a bit.
But surely, when and I know this is a conversation that we're going to be having in future podcasts, is about architects, specifiers, people who are doing the developers here. I mean, I don't know how it's not specified correctly in the first place.
It is. There's a document B that's introduced, or BS 9999. So document B is a more condensed version of BS 9999.
Right.
And that's something that any builder or someone who's building obviously residential blocks should be looking at this as well.
Yeah.
It's available, but a lot of people still don't use it. So.
Yeah, I feel like money, unfortunately, comes into play here, and people cut corners.
And also what we come up against as well when we're doing inspections. So we'll go to a block that was built in 1990, and the door probably did pass regulations in 1990.
Interesting.
And then the flat owner will say, look, I have not changed this door. This door's in the perfect condition. I've not made any adjustments. The door was fine when it went in.
And again, they probably aren't aware that they need to. This is the responsibility cycle again, isn't it? This whole notion.
I don't think there was, obviously what you're saying, 1990, if you do go into these premises, it is a fire door, but the gaps are not compliant at all. So there was no regulation about it. So people weren't checking it. I mean, years ago they had a clerk of works, and that guy would go around and check the doors. If it wasn't right, then they'd have to change it. And that's with any type of works on a construction site. So clerk of works was the worst thing we ever did, was disband that and get rid of him.
Yeah.
Because he was the regulator of all building implementations.
Yeah, funny enough, my father-in-law was a clerk of works.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it, on building sites?
So it's something that should come back, really.
Yeah, that's
which would maintain, obviously...
It all comes down to cost, though, isn't it? I mean, these developers are on a tight budget, and if they can save some money, I guess, they're business people as well. We've had it before where we've gone and done work on blocks that are less than 2 years old, and the leaseholders are kind of up in arms about paying more money for doing work, and we just say, look,
it's not their fault, is it?
It's not.
No, it's irritating, that, isn't it? I can understand their frustrations. And I suppose there's no way they can run it back up the chain and say, look, this was 2 years ago.
I don't know how it's affected by
NHBC.
Yeah, NHBC or 10-year ticket on the building or the warranty. So I'm not sure how that comes into play.
Interesting. So I just want to pick up again, Nicholas, on the change in government and the legislation. So again, I imagine these things are constantly being updated.
It was, originally, when this first came in, it was with the European sector. So all this kind of legislation came in 1998.
Oh, right. So we're part of the EU.
So that's how it all came about, because we was quite slack on fire protection and implementation of it again. And then obviously we tried to push this change in the UK sector, and it didn't go down too well because it meant people had to spend money and that wasn't happening. There's so many legislation changes. So what happened is obviously people being prosecuted, but it took them, the government or legal bodies, 2 or 3 years to get people into court and then prosecute them.
Interesting.
So they brought out what was called the Fire Reform Order in 2005, and they made what was called a responsible person. So the responsible person is the person that would be prosecuted if there was any issues found on premises or it hadn't been maintained to a correct
and are they prosecuted?
They are. There is cases of prosecutions and imprisonment. But initially, before that, obviously they couldn't find someone to prosecute. It would get passed around, and there'd be so many individuals that would be approached, and it was hard to ascertain who to prosecute.
Interesting.
So the 2000 Reform Order defines that it must be a responsible person. The responsible person doesn't have to be the owner of the premises. It can be anyone that's employed, or it can be anyone. Basically, they just have to maintain that the building is kept satisfactory to the requirements of the legislation, and obviously they just have to make sure everything's kept up to date, like the fire doors, the fire alarm checks. Can
I just interject here? And I completely agree with Nicholas about the responsible person. The problem I see is where there's a grey area, where the responsible person is a management company.
So it's not a person, so it's a...
Exactly.
Yes.
And the doors that we're talking about are demised to the leaseholder. A lot of the management companies will just send a letter to the leaseholder saying your door's not compliant, and that's it. Doesn't really kind of address the issue. Those doors are still not compliant. So the responsible person goes, well, I've done my job. I've told the leaseholder. The leaseholder probably doesn't read the letter and throws it in the bin. I've known leaseholders that literally just said, I don't understand this. I've just got this letter from the management company and just puts it in the bin. No one follows up with that. So going back to Nicholas's point about the responsible person, where does that responsible person kind of get rid of their
where does their responsibility begin and end? It's really interesting. So there's an obligation. That's right. That's fascinating.
I think that responsible role works within commercial sectors and businesses, but in respect of this, what we're talking about today, it's a bit more. It's a bit more of a grey area.
Right.
It's very hard to determine who the responsible person is. Would it be the managing agent? Should there be a contract signed? Or maybe there should be an agreement between... It's an area that needs to be identified and looked at, I think, definitely. But as I say, responsible roles in other businesses and commercial sectors, it works. But this is a different area altogether, I think.
Yeah, no, I think everyone wants some clarification.
Managing agents want clarification. Like people that you'd think would be in the know, they're not 100% sure on this. Because how I see it is, initially the responsible person is the management company, and then if they can prove that they've highlighted this to the flat owner, they've passed that responsibility onto the flat owner. But the flat owner might not then do anything with it. And then
how do they? This is so interesting. I find this fascinating. But how do they know that the flat owners even? It's like anything. They could say, "I didn't get a letter."
Yeah. Normally, it comes up in the risk assessment. So they have a risk assessment and the door's inspected. And from my knowledge, most managing agents send them obviously the details of the issues found, and that's then that's the responsibility. But to get them to do the works is, I don't know where they stand in that context. I don't.
And then, let's say worst case scenario, there's a block of flats and there's one escape route.
Yes.
And the flat door, which is right next to that escape route, has a fire in the flat, and nobody can escape the building. And there's a big fire and it's disastrous. And then the fire brigade do their investigation. It turns out that what was a significant factor in the damage that was caused was that door not being a fire door. Who's responsible for that situation? I don't know how you'd see that, Nicholas.
That's a difficult one.
Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Yeah. I think going along that pathway as well. I think we was talking about mortgage companies and obviously they require fire doors in the buildings to be kept to a certain standard because it's their it's their investment.
Yeah,
they're lending the money.
They're lending the money, right?
And
of course.
The tenants need to understand that as well. They need to maintain, because the insurance companies, there's a good possibility that it could affect a payout.
Yeah, I mean, the insurance companies now are asking you if you are compliant to current regs anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just insured some of my properties again this year, and under the statement of facts was, are they compliant with current regulations? So I think they're starting to get wise to this as well.
Got you.
But again, how many people read the statement of facts when they're doing their insurance? Not probably that many.
Well, I suppose it depends. So on that, so if it, have you got these things, Dean? So this is quite interesting. So your insurance company are asking you, do you have all of these certificates? Do you say yes, or do you have to present them to
you
proof?
just have to say yes. And obviously, clearly, if there's a fire or there's a claim, then they're going to ask you for proof of it.
Right.
I mean, this is me insuring freeholds of properties, not. I mean, obviously, if you're a leaseholder, you're going to be insuring the contents of your property. The insurance is done by your management company. But I don't think the management companies are maybe not being totally upfront with the insurance companies to say, look, there are some of our doors that aren't compliant. It needs to be put on the statement of facts. So if there is a fire, you know that we've been upfront with you. I mean, insurance companies will ask you about your cladding, your insulation. They won't insure the building if you don't show them exactly what you've got on that building.
Okay.
I had that with one of my blocks the other day, and we'd insulated the building for the tenant's benefit, and I was asked to prove exactly what had gone on there. I went to the company that did it. They sent me the certificate, and that was fine. The insurance company was happy to insure it.
Yes.
I think this will happen on the fire doors. When you make a statement of fact, you're going to have to prove that your doors in that block are compliant. To go on Gerry's point, if your door is breached and you cause a lot of damage in that block, then I think there's a case that the insurance could be invalidated or reduced on payout if you're not compliant.
Not getting your payout is one thing. The worst it looks is you're culpable and you get imprisoned or you get fined.
Yeah, possibility.
Yeah.
You know, at the other end of that spectrum.
Well, as we said before, it's preservation and life and premises. That's what the doors are there for. It's not, that's the whole aspect of the installation.
So, like, if you're a flat owner, and nobody likes spending money, but if you're a flat owner or if you're a landlord, and you own a unit in a block, you own a flat in a block, like a sensible person would want to make sure that everything was in place, everything was correct, and your investment, whether you're an owner-occupier or a landlord, is looked after.
Yeah.
So if people stand back and look at the big picture, a sensible person will always say, yeah, actually, every door in here does need to be a fire door.
Yeah.
And everything needs to be in place. Everything should be correct. Yeah.
I guess if you think about it, why was the law changed in 2023 about fire doors if they didn't think they really were that important? So they were changed for a reason. But I don't think that message is getting through to people who are leaseholders, landlords, how important it is. And I think it's to do with the education. So hopefully these podcasts are going to help educate people. The law was changed for that reason.
Yeah.
You need to get your doors compliant.
I think that's why the new legislation came out in January 24 was to push it in residential blocks of flats over 11 metres and under 11 metres. So, it was recognised, I think it was recognised that this was part of a problem. Maybe that's why it was reintroduced. That's 3 times fire door legislation has changed in the last 7 or 8 years. So
And you do fire risk assessments, you do fire door risk assessments. You've seen an upsurge in demand, so perhaps it is becoming more.
It is becoming more and more to the forefront of flat owners' minds, definitely.
But there was a scary stat, I think Gerry told me in our first few 6 months of knowing each other. It was the percentage of doors that were failing.
Yeah.
Can you?
I can't.
It was a staggering number.
Yeah, maybe I said 90% of
Yeah,
doors. It
right.
was virtually nearly all doors fail. I don't know if you find the same.
60% or not up to possibly 85, 90% in the UK, and I think that was the understanding. That's why it became apparent, especially after Grenfell.
Yeah.
All those doors were installed, 120-minute doors that weren't lasting 120 minutes on fire escape routes. Not that people were using the escape routes because it was a stay-put policy, but people did try to use the escape routes. But those 120-minute doors were ill-fitted. They didn't comply at all. So I don't want to go into what the gaps were, but they were horrendous. So that was a recognition of, the importance. But,
Because on like a lot of people think if it's a fire door and that's it. There's a lot more to a door than just the door itself.
Yeah.
And like we're checking a number of components of that door, and it just needs one of them to fail. The door might not be closing properly. Like Nicholas the Gaps hasn't got a seal around the door.
Right.
Somebody's painted over the seal. Hinges aren't right. There's quite a lot to it.
Yeah.
There's also other implications as well. Is about, although we're putting the fire doors in, there's a compartmentation integrity. So there's another aspect that's called passive fire.
Right.
So even we're putting that fire door on, we're making it a compartment, but there are other aspects where there could be penetrations through them compartments of walls. So that's another thing that's brought up on the fire risk assessment, but that's normally covered by the managing agent, isn't it? But, that's another part of the compartmentation integrity with the fire door is to make sure that the flats also have passive fire, and passive fire is about breaches of fire barriers and penetrations.
Right, and again, my feeling is they probably don't know a great deal about this.
No. That's again why we have to carry out risk. Because you see that as well, don't you? Breaches in.
Yeah, you're talking about say you've got like a service cupboard with all the electrics in it.
Right.
The door might be brilliant, might be a fire door, and everything's perfect, but the walls are just made of one.
Yeah, so that's
Well,
it.
just
So
plasterboard
interesting.
that isn't fire resistant.
Yeah.
So the door might be perfect, but if there's a fire in
so
that cupboard, the whole thing's going to go up. Yeah.
But just to interject here, those sort of problems are easily fixed by the management company because it comes out of the service charge account.
Yeah.
The leases, the freeholder is responsible for anything in the communal area.
Yeah.
And in the lease, it will say that the freeholder's got to do this work and we're going to charge all the leaseholders to do this work. That's easy. It's when it's demised to the leaseholder as an individual door.
Yeah.
It's down to that leaseholder to find the money.
Yes.
So all the communal doors, all the service areas and all that are normally fairly good.
That's,
Yeah.
that's that point of bringing it up is that you're maintaining those service areas, but that's where it falls back on that there's a failure with the resident.
So and this is where the lease is not very clear.
Yeah.
And that's the get out for the management companies. It's demised to the leaseholder.
Yeah.
We can't enforce that.
No, we told them.
Exactly.
But we can't.
That's all we can. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a gap somewhere that needs to be filled for this to kind of take effect, because if you've only got one door out of 11 that's compliant,
Yeah.
you're not safe. The building's not safe.
No.
It's just clearly not safe.
So you mentioned fire risk assessments. Okay, so let's hit the heart of this. How often, I don't know if it's a legal requirement or not, so if you could explain, how often do they need to be conducted?
The legislation states yearly, doesn't it? But then there's areas where people do it every 2 or 3 years. But
Depending on the size of the building, I
yeah,
guess
it
normally
depends
comes
on
down
the
to-
obviously the building, basically. But normally it would be yearly. We get companies, but they're commercial sectors, so they do them every year, basically.
Yeah.
But some people leave it 2 to 3 years. But the legislation, it does state in there in the reform order a yearly risk assessment. Basically.
So when I hear the word legislation, I align that to law.
Yeah, it's a legal requirement.
And to legal requirements. So are you saying thereby if someone's not doing it every year, they are by definition not?
They're not complying to the. I mean, places like pubs or restaurants, we do it yearly, mainly.
Got you.
Because it's probably a licensed premises.
Yes.
There's more traffic flow in there with people.
I think,
clubs.
the way I understand it, and Nicholas maybe can correct me on this, but on the smaller blocks, the ones less than 4 stories, I think the responsible person is expected to carry out a fire risk assessment, and then clearly, if the next year nothing's changed and the responsible person's happy that nothing's changed within the block, you don't have to carry out another one. It's when something changes.
Yeah.
But then that becomes difficult to police, because if one of your leaseholders changes a door,
Yes.
Yeah.
you're back to square one again. So
Yes.
again, it's a grey area. When you carry out the fire risk assessment, every year sounds like an overkill on blocks, smaller blocks, but things are changing. So that's where the responsible person needs to go in and do their quarterly checks, semi-annual checks. That's when you pick these things up.
I mean, companies like we work for Lidl, we do all the distribution centres, so they have them every year.
Yes.
Their insurance requires that they have they meet with the legislation and they have to have yearly inspections. They have to have the fire doors inspected yearly. That's through their insurance company. Passive fire inspections about the compartmentation and that's done every year. So when I do go back, there is possibly issues where contractors have been drilled through the walls, so that we've lost the integrity of the compartment.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But as you say, within flats and resident, it's a different ball game really, because there's not that. It's not really although it's classed as a commercial area or sector, it's not under that duress of contractors coming in all the time.
To get the other end of the scale, say you have because a lot of it comes down to government guidance as well. It's not always crystal clear. So you have a house converted into 2 flats, and the shared area is like 6 foot by 6 foot. Most agents would probably do maybe every 2 years fire risk assessment on that.
The other thing is what we recommend in our risk assessments is that the managing agents implement RAMs.
Yeah.
RAMs, so about working practices, so they can identify if they do get a contractor going within that building, they get a method statement of the work that's being carried out. And then anything that's being used, tools, gas, or any equipment that's being used that could be affecting the integrity of the building. So method statements and RAMs. So we suggest that to every management company that they implement that, so they can see exactly what the contractor's going in to do. So if they can identify that there could be an issue, then that's another way of probably documenting. The safety of the common areas as well.
Yeah, so when you're talking to managing agents, and I've lived in flats myself, so They are sometimes they're small. They can be small outfits, or sometimes they can be fairly large outfits. Is there a health and safety operative within these, or is it just the office? Who's making the decision within the manager?
It's probably normally the property manager will know the legislation and knows what they have to carry out. It all depends on the size of the organisation.
Yeah, because I say this because, of course, we keep coming back to this word education, and our desire and really our need, our obligation to be communicating who are we talking to, I guess is the question I'm asking. So when you're doing fire risk assessments and fire door inspections, because presumably, because of the company that you are, you'll say, great, green tick, it's all good, we'll see you next year because you'll book them in.
Yeah, that's right.
Presumably that's the way it works because you're doing your due diligence, that's the way you work. As opposed to, are you okay? I'll see you again soon. It's...
Yes, it's a big challenge for property managers, which is, especially in the last, since Grenfell, it's a big challenge because there's a big focus on it.
Yeah.
And we try to help. We try to help property managers as much as we can, and that's kind of why we teamed up, because it's fine us doing our inspection, but as soon as we've done the inspection, the first question that comes back, even while we're doing the inspection, well, who's going to do the work? Who's going to do the repairs? Are you able to? Should we done? That's why we teamed.
And that's why you've now got Expyro, because we realised that to streamline the process was one, making it easier for everybody to be compliant.
Yes.
So Gerry can go in and inspect a property, he can foul the door, we get the report back at CFD, and we can estimate the cost of that repairs within a day, and that just gives everybody clarity that this is the cost to make your door compliant, and you then make that decision. So you're not waiting 2 or 3 weeks and you have to get somebody else to come back and look at the door. So we feel that streamlining the process tries to help everybody, and we're doing the same thing with Nicholas and his reports. So here at Expyro, we can look at any report and we can estimate off that report.
I mean, I've worked with other installers, probably 10 installers over the last 7 years, and probably Compliant Fire Doors has got it together. I mean, a lot of the others were just contractors and they couldn't maintain the service that we wanted them to provide, where Compliant Fire Doors is a complete package. It looks like it's a really good relationship. It works well. And, it's professionally set up, and it works both ways.
Yeah. So so the solution here is a very purposeful solution. You're not just, to your point, you're not just contractors. This is what you do.
Yeah.
This is exactly what you do. So your responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I went through it as a landlord, and I've set up something that works for every landlord and makes their job easier to be compliant.
Yeah.
And if we can help people to be compliant, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, because what flat owners, the situation they may find themselves in is they'll get a letter from their management company saying, we need to ensure you have a fire door, so we're going to send out an inspector. They'd send us out. So we'd inspect it and we'd produce a report which would go to the leaseholder from the management company. And it might just say on there, your door's failed. It's your responsibility to now go and fix that. Number one, chances are that they're not going to want to spend any money. They're not even sure who to ring to get the door done.
Yeah.
They're concerned they might phone a company that they found randomly off the internet. They're not sure who they are. Do they trust them?
Yeah.
So it's very easy for a flat owner to say, look, I'm just going to put blinkers on and not do anything with this and see what happens, which is the wrong approach. So what we try to do, work with agents to just make it as least amount of barriers as possible.
Yeah.
So it's as seamless as possible, and it's just everybody. It helps everybody out, and it's just a lot simpler.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. It is very difficult, and I found that. And as I say, not just mentioning you as a company again, but it's been set up. This works well. This does, and it does give people. We've had fantastic feedback from the jobs that we've supplied. Customers giving feedback, but
and I'm just curious now. So, what are some of the common failures then on a fire door? You mentioned things like hinges and stuff.
Yeah, they might not be fire rated hinges. people will say to us, well, a hinge is a hinge, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm thinking,
yeah.
right? So
No, it has to have a melting point of 800 degrees. Hinges can be made out of loads of different metal materials,
Gotcha.
aluminium, copper, brass, steel. So there's certain hinges that will withstand fire.
yeah,
So it's fine having a door that's perfect, but if that door's going to fall off as soon as it reaches a certain temperature, it's no good. You need to have proper hinges on the door.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
What else?
Intumescent seal, fire and smoke seal around the door, in the frame. So people probably see these on these doors and they might think it's a draft excluder. It isn't. So there'll be two parts to a fire and smoke seal. There'll be the furry bit, or it might be a fin. So that will stop.
So the furry bits.
Yeah.
I did think that was insulation.
Yeah,
Fin. So
yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah. So if there's a fire in the flat and there's smoke, it straight away will stop smoke coming into the hallway. And then once that fire starts to get serious and it reaches 200 degrees Celsius, the intumescent part of that seal will expand and it will create a barrier all the way around the door and the frame, so no smoke or fire should get out for a certain period of time.
Yeah, well, go back to my first point. Isn't a fire door? Aren't they all fire doors? Aren't all doors fire doors?
Same with a fire-rated letterbox. People think a fire-rated... I'll fail a letterbox, so I'll say it's not fire-rated, and they think, I need to get this really heavy-duty metal letterbox in. No, that's not what a fire-rated letterbox is. That has the seal inside the letterbox as well. So if there's a fire, reaches 200 degrees, that hole in the door where the letters go in will just... That seal will expand and block that hole so smoke can't get out.
Fascinating. Of course, letterboxes. Yeah, didn't even think about that. Yeah.
So gaps is a really common one because fire doors are quite heavier than a normal standard door. That's why you have to have 3 hinges to hold the door in place.
Right.
But they're still quite heavy. So over time, they might drop. They might fall a little bit.
Yeah.
So it just needs straightening up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the spy holes, isn't it? They have to be fire rated as well, intumescent, and obviously with all the hinges, they have to have packers or intumescent packer, so like a protective fire packer on the back of the door, and all the locks have to be wrapped in intumescent because obviously cutting a hole into the door does affect the integrity. But
Right.
we use intumescent wrap around the locks. So it's the whole door is quite complex, isn't it, with what has to be implemented. So to make it,
So when you're inspecting it, Gerry, what do you do? What's the process, and what bits are you you're looking at all these? I imagine.
Yeah. So we'll have an initial look at the door just to get a feel for it, and then we'll document all of the components of the door, the size of the door, the type of door it is. We'll give it a label, and then
I've got a question. Sorry to interrupt, but do you need, if you're a homeowner, so if you're a leaseholder, you're living it. Do you have to see both? Do you have to see both sides of the door?
We need to see both sides of the door because to check the gaps, you need to be on the inside, and you also need to make sure the door it needs to be able to auto close. So it has to have a closer. So we need to make sure the door closes.
So you can't expect from the outside. Coming back to your point, that the person who lives in the property needs to be able to.
Yeah,
and that was one of the most important things. And again, being a landlord, having a tenant to open the door once is hard enough.
Yeah.
Twice is they're going, what's going on? To do it a third time is just impossible.
Because they're seeing it
so
as
that's why we
disruption.
streamline it. So we literally can do a door in 2 visits. One to inspect it. You get the quote. We turn up with the technicians. They do the remedial work, and it's recertified off that. So you only have to open the door twice, and that definitely helps tenants, leaseholders, landlords comply with this.
Got you.
Just going back to the changes again there, just that very interesting what we're talking about. But years ago, when we were told to check fire doors and doing risk assessments, we were never told to enter the flats to check the doors. But this only come later, so now we have to access the flats to check the integrity of the door.
But that presumably changed.
That changed. This is why I was saying there's been 3 changes in fire doors. So 10 years ago, you wouldn't have gone into the flat, looked at that door, but those doors weren't compliant and they were a high risk at the time. But now we have to enter.
Yeah. So that presumably also changed your workflow, didn't it? Because once upon a time you could look at it from one side.
That's all you do. You couldn't see. All you'd be looking at is the common area doors and what was wrong with the common area. We weren't told to look at hinges. No, we was never told to look at hinges.
Yes.
If it had 3 hinges and it looked like, it was a fire door, that was a fire door.
Yeah.
It's not till now, years on, that I think, God, I never used to check this.
Yeah.
Never told.
Well, I guess we didn't know.
I guess if you think about it, if Gerry said 90% of doors were failing,
That's
clearly the old way of looking at a fire door wasn't very efficient, was it? Because you couldn't see if it had a self-closer because they would normally be on the inside.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to see the hinges. So I guess in a way, it solved the problem.
That's what they've identified. That's why they're doing it. Identified that it wasn't sufficient enough.
No, clearly not.
Let's just run the cycle the other way through. So if something isn't compliant, if a door's not compliant, what are the ramifications? So I'm a tenant. You've come and inspect and you give me my report. By the way, who do you give the report to? Me or
whoever our client is? Normally the property manager is our client. They've asked us to do the report, so we provide them the report. It might be an individual flat owner might get, because they might be doing a sale, so they need to get a report. So depending on whoever asks us to do the report is who we provide the report to. So if we're asked to do a report for a block of flats, of 12 flats, by the property manager, we'd give them the report. We wouldn't give it to the 12 flat owners. We'd probably let them manage that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what are the penalties once you've given that, and if they're not compliant, if they don't take on any of your advice, I guess this is a question to you, Nicholas, what are the penalties if someone's been told what to do, but they simply don't do it?
This is the grey area.
They would enforce it by...
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's through the manager.
I think Lee's question's more to do with if there's a fire and you aren't compliant. You would obviously, there would be prosecutions.
Yeah.
As I said, to enforce it from a leasehold perspective, you have to go down. You have to look at the lease, and the lease. Most leases will say if you invalidate the insurance, building insurance, you can then get sued because you're breaking a covenant in your lease. So that would be a separate thing, but that would be down to the freeholder to take the leaseholder to court to get him to comply with that. But clearly, if they don't become compliant and there's a fire, then clearly it's a serious matter.
So this is the case law that you mentioned earlier. This is people who have literally gone to prison.
Yeah. Or landlords or tenant, anyone who's not complied, and then obviously there's been fines and imprisonment.
Yeah, because ultimately...
The maximum is 2.5 years imprisonment. That's what's in the reform order, fire reform order, for failure or breach of legislation.
Is that
serious breach?
Serious breach, right, okay. And what... Okay.
Non-serious breach is normally fines.
Yes.
Yeah, fines.
Yeah.
But if it's a serious breach where it's put obviously life at risk, then that's imprisonment. If there's been fatalities or anything like that, that's imprisonment. Up 2.5 2 years. 2.5 years.
It almost doesn't seem enough if there's fatalities, does it? Because does it?
It doesn't really, no.
Because again, there is a responsible person, be it a company or an actual person. Fascinating. What should landlords do about a failed fire door? What should they do? So you've done your job.
We recommend that any issues that we identify should be resolved within 1 month.
Okay, interesting. And that's not a legal thing.
It's just our recommendation.
Yeah,
it's just our recommendation. It can be resolved within 1 month, so there's no harm in giving that recommendation. And I think the longer that people drag it on, it falls to the back of their mind again. They should just, if we say these hinges need replacing, or the door needs replacing, or the seals need replacing, because it's a question we get a lot. Well, how long have I got to do that? So we recommend 1 month. It's a reasonable time frame.
Yeah.
That's when it should be done. So they should do it as soon as they can, because the longer that they leave it, then there's a risk there.
Yeah. But again, it comes down to who's responsible and literally who's responsible and who's paying for it. I see those two as they're not always the same people. Thereby, that's where I can imagine people kick the can down the road, because it's like it's a cost.
It is a cost, but they're taking a chance because something could happen, and then there's an audit trail that they've been given a report saying, look, this has happened.
But Nicholas, on a FRA, when it's a red and it's a major failure, how long do you normally give?
We give them 1 month to 3 months,
Right, so
maximum, depending on, I mean, just going back to this, if we look at a commercial premises, I was talking about fire audits, and the fire officers don't have any responsibility anymore because they work with the fire reform order. But it's just a case of just showing the difference here. So if they went into a restaurant and there was failure on fire doors, they get an enforcement notice or they get a time period where they have to do it. And then they'll do a revisit, the auditor, to make sure that the work's been complete, or they have to send evidence that the work's been
completed.
Out. So most like restaurants or commercial buildings, they have to, if they get a fire audit, this is what the fire brigade they go out and do an audit, and they require to see all of the documentation that's required by the fire reform order. But it doesn't seem that doesn't fit in with this case, does it? So I don't think they carry audits out on blocks of flats.
I think on some of the bigger blocks, I think some of the big blocks, you'll get the fire brigade going and do audits on the bigger blocks. But on the majority of blocks in this area, you probably don't find you get an audit until something's actually happened and gone wrong.
I think if there was an audit on maybe the smaller blocks where we're having trouble enforcing people to change doors, if it was obviously audited by the fire brigade, doing an audit and then they put an enforcement, then that would probably cover, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it seems to me, looking at some of the correspondence we get now, that the council on the licensing scheme within the area, which I think covers about 4,000 properties, their recommendation now is to enforce the fire door compliancy. So you're finding that we're getting a lot of landlords calling us up, asking for a quote to fix doors that the council have picked up on. Right. So that's a good sign.
Maybe that's the way they're going to
cover that's a good sign. But that's only the licensed properties, so that probably covers and some of the single residentials as well. But clearly more needs to be done. More education, and the onus needs to be on safety. This is going to protect a tenant, a leaseholder, in the event of a fire. That's got to be a good thing. If we can get that message through from these sort of podcasts, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, interesting enough, in a future podcast, we're going to be interviewing the fire service. So it'd be really interesting to get their stance on this, because my feeling is when they're doing some of the things you're saying, it's a resource thing, isn't it? As far as they're concerned, who do they assess first when they are able to assess?
Well, they're going to go high risk first, clearly, which is the right thing to do. Again, it still doesn't, something needs to be made more clear to people about the responsibility, and that comes down to leaseholders and landlords. At the end of the day, look, at Expyro, what we decided was we had a number of times people would get the quote from us and £800 for a brand new door with all the bits and pieces on it was expensive. So we thought, okay, why don't we come up with a monthly scheme to pay over 12 months on interest-free credit?
Oh, that's interesting.
And we pick up the cost of that. Okay, it actually costs us to give that out, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
If we can help another person become compliant, that's a good thing. So we're really pleased. We're one of the only companies, I think, in the area that offers that as an incentive to get your door done.
Yeah.
And we break that cost down to an affordable monthly amount over 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. So picking up on the point you said earlier about kind of the barriers to entry, what's the simplest, the least resistance to a solution? So that's going to be it, isn't it? Because 800, I didn't even know. So that's how much they can cost, is it? Yeah, a fire door, anything there and thereabouts.
Yeah, ballpark figure.
It's a lot of money, isn't it, to find in one go? Especially if all of a sudden you're telling me that that's something that I've got to pay for. Okay, I can see that as a really positive solution. So as we sort of end this particular series, I just want to ask a few questions really on about what the future we think this looks like. So again, we've been really talking about fire doors in this particular session. I imagine at some point, Nicholas, will get you back on a future podcast to talk about fire safety in a bigger scope. But do we think there's going to be more changes? There's been changes.
I think we've got to a point now where they've got it to. I mean, I don't think there's much more they can push forward. Just this grey area again. I think this is a major point about getting people to do the work, getting people to make the change. Where they've got to upgrade their doors. I think that's the biggest.
Yeah, I've seen, and I was mentioning this to a couple of my colleagues. There's a new website, a government website on fire safety, and it allows the tenant that lives in a block, if they're unsure about the safety of the property or even the structure of the property, they can now go onto a website. There's a phone number, there's an email address. So maybe that's going to start helping as well, because most of these blocks, they've got tenants in there. They pay a very good rent, and for that they should have safety. That should be the paramount part of you're paying a rent. You want to be in a safe block. And hopefully those sort of initiatives will make it easier for people now to report that my door's not compliant. I've had this report come through as a tenant. My landlord doesn't want to do the work. Clearly that's not fair, because it's my safety that's on the line. So maybe that's the sort of thing we're hoping to see over the next few months.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I like that. So that's the groundswell upwards, isn't it? So that's actually tenants saying, that's fascinating. So a tenant saying to their management company, this door's not fireproof. And some of the stuff I don't suppose I thought that could be a thing, but it's all about education. So if they start to see it more.
If you're a tenant and you're on the 6th floor of a block of flats, that's your safety. Yeah. You want the full 30 minutes to get out of that block safely. And clearly, if not everybody's compliant, then that's going to make it difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there needs to be something that changes, that we get more compliance. And I think that's probably the way forward. Maybe that's what will change over the next few months.
Yeah, interesting.
Where I see that going as well is, and maybe some agents are doing it, when tenants are changed, when they get a new tenant in, the managing agent won't re-let that property unless
I think it's
proof that
another fantastic idea,
like an EPC check or a gas safety check. It'll just be another one of those checks.
So you feel like, again, it's only an education thing, because the more this is out there, they can't really avoid the subject, can they? This is the thing, I think, ultimately. And those grey areas you talk about, I always find with a lot of things that are grey areas, sadly, it takes a disaster to make a grey area and not a grey area anymore.
Exactly
Because
what I was just thinking. It takes for something else to happen again for a major change.
Yeah. Especially in that little grey area that you talk about there with that responsibility. So I think the notion that there's a responsible person is good, but the idea that the responsible person's obligations are still, where do they begin and end, is the grey area. So at some point something's going to happen. Going to bring that to the forefront. Yeah, fascinating. What else? What else do we think about the future of fire safety and fire doors? And I'm thinking, and it's, picking up on your point there about even some new builds haven't met the required legislation. What about when you're dealing with specifiers and talking to? I know this is something that Expyro are looking to do, is to talk to planning stage about sort of space management and how things are done from a fire. What's your feeling there? What can we do?
This would be a good way to relay information even back to building control, and because again they've given all the responsibility back to the builder, or they go to site still, but they want you to supply them photos, information, data sheets about exactly what you've done.
Yeah.
So they're relying.
I guess if you've got a new build, then for the contractor or the developer to pay for a inspector to go in, inspect the doors, issue a certificate, and have that as part of the sale pack.
Yes.
Once it's all been done and it's ready to be sold, whether it's Gerry or Nicholas, they go in, they inspect the doors, they issue a certificate, and then that's it. That would be, I think, maybe something you could do. And that would be your gold standard then, isn't it?
Yeah.
The carpenters who are putting the doors in have done it properly. Everything's been done to the book. but it gets a certificate. You have that certificate.
Yeah, I mean, we're working like that at the moment with some high-rise blocks that we're working. We're going in stages. So we're looking
Interesting.
we're going first stage where we're applicating the passive fire. We take pictures, that's documented, and then any other fire installations or anything else we're doing before the building's complete, we have to document everything. So then that is given to building control. It's given back to the main builder.
Yeah.
He supplies it, and then they want confirmation in picture format or video format of what's actually been implemented.
Yeah.
And then again, it goes back to the doors, the frames, how the frames have been installed, whether they're installed correctly. And again, we have to video all that and supply it in picture format back to the builder, and then he supplies it to building control. So and that's what we're doing around this area at the moment. So
Really?
in Lee, where they built the new block on the corner.
What, the ACE building?
Yeah, we had to do that there. So it was all in stages, floor by floor, and we would take. So we're doing the same. They're building another one in Chelmsford. We've got the same process there. So we're looking at the floors to make sure there's 60 minutes supporting the structure, the steel installations, make sure they're fireproofed. So the whole thing.
Yeah.
So they're getting us in to do that, and then that goes back to building control, so that can be all confirmed that the work's been done properly.
Okay, I think we're drawn to the end of this particular podcast. Absolutely fascinating, given this is our first. Nicholas, thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Gerry, of course, Dean, of course, thank you. And we look forward to episode 2 of our series in the not too distant future. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.